Hello, and thank you for checking out this recording of the L&D Drop-In. Now, unfortunately, you missed the session live, but it was all about how we can get buy-in for our L&D initiatives. And if you're unfamiliar with the format, we bring together four experts for 1 hour and give them 15 minutes each to share their best advice on tackling that topic. We covered everything from how we really work out what matters to our stakeholders, how we can listen for the right signals, why we can't fix bad learning with good marketing, how we deal with the baggage from tech to change perceptions, what one of our guests learned from his teaching experiences in terms of getting buy-in, and much, much more. If you like what you hear from any of our guests, you can use the links in the description below to connect with them. And I need to remind you that the L&D Drop-In is powered by HowNow, your one home for learning and skills. We help companies tackle some of their big problems around learning and skills, like centralizing everything in one place, mapping and measuring skills at the speed and scale needed to close skills gaps, integrating with the tools people use every day, and much, much more. So if you want to learn more, there'll be a link in the description too, or you can go to gethownow.com/pod. That is gethownow.com/pod. So we're going to dive right into this and pick up a question to our first expert, Hannah Shelton, the Global Engagement and Knowledge Lead at Denstu. Thanks, Hannah. Our instinct normally is sell, sell, sell. And I know part of your approach is actually listening for signals in order to get buy-in. So tell us a little bit more about how you do that. What are the signals? Which channels are they coming through?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I think about it from a consumer point of view, and I don't enjoy being sold to. And there's very few occasions where somebody has tried to push something on me, and I've gone, yeah, you know what, that sounds great. I'm absolutely going to go for it. But also, there are times where somebody has sold me something to me, and it's been the exact right time. They knew how to get me, and that felt like a good experience. So I think it's like for me, I always put myself in almost thinking of my own shoes, and we've all had that experience, right? Of we are L&D professionals ourselves, and we have that we have to kind of get people engaged in what we're doing, but we are also consumers. So I think also, it's always important to go back to that point of view. I think something that I talk a lot about in my current role is the idea of pull versus push. And what I'm doing more so in my role at the moment is waiting for people to tell me what they want and when they want it. Versus, when I first started out in my L&D, in the L&D space, and especially in my digital learning role, I remember building content around strategic thinking and influencing, and I was so excited about it because I was like, this is great content. Everybody's going to want this. Isn't this amazing? And nobody used it because nobody had asked for it. And, fast forward to now where I've actually got people chasing me on Hannah, you said that content you're building. I really want it. I really need it right now. And that's an amazing kind of capacity to work in and a very different space to be operating in. I think for me, signals are subtle. They aren't what people are telling you. And if anyone is interested in influencing, I always come back to this idea of positions versus interests. So positions are things that people tell you they want, and interests are the true drivers behind that. And I think what we have to do is really listen carefully, also ask the right questions, make sure that we're going to the right people, and that we've got a very broad scope of who we're approaching. So I'm operating in quite a big, complex company globally, and markets operate in very different ways depending on where you go. I have to make sure that I'm listening, I'm really attuned to and listening into what all of them are telling me. And it's very different, person by person, market by market, and everybody's driven by a different why. And I think, a lot of us probably have been in this situation where maybe like leadership has come to you and say, I need this specific learning solution, or I need this specific program. And actually, they're thinking about it from their perspective of what's going to best suit the company and what the company's priorities are. You haven't then thought about what the user experience is going to be, and actually what are their reasons for getting involved in this, because if they're not driven by it, they're never going to, they might actually do the learning, but they're never going to implement anything. So I think it's really important to make sure you're going to a wide variety of sources there as well. And I think, acknowledge where you don't have the right knowledge, and you need to fill those gaps from other areas of the business and other people, because I was quite lucky in my early career that I'd grown up in that business, so I could actually make decisions on what was the best learning outcome because I'd been there and I knew what was needed. Versus now, I have no idea what people do day to day, their commercial roles. I'm so far removed from the day to day. I have to acknowledge that, and I have to make sure that I'm, like I said, reaching out to the right people and listening into what it is that they tell me they need.
Yeah, To dive into that a little bit more about the signals, where they're coming from, is there any sort of example you could share? I mean, something that came to mind for me is when I worked at a travel company before, we had a plugin on our FAQ page where people if we didn't have an answer to it, it would still track what people asked. So we could say, right, we're seeing these repeat things. Or internally, we often see things on Slack, like people asking repeat questions around, I can't find the price and what's the latest price. And like, are those the sort of signals, or are you seeing them coming in different places?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of, and it does feel like a lot of work at the time, but it's worth it. But mine is mainly conversational based. I actively go and seek out people to get input from, and I listen because I think I'm always a bit mindful of when you get feedback from one or two different places. And I have had that before as well, where somebody's come to me and said, oh, I've heard one person say this, therefore we should change the entire approach to what we're doing. I'm very, very careful about. I made that mistake earlier in my career, and I was changing the graduate program every 2 seconds. I now know how to be very kind of mindful of those sort of types of feedback. And I think there is no replacement for just having a conversation with somebody. And like I said, it all comes back to asking the right questions. But I think there's something big for me on timing as well. So I'll be honest, so I'm working on developing a big learning program at the moment for the, global company for a lot of different audiences. And I have changed my timeline on multiple occasions, but it's the right thing to do because I've been in a conversation with somebody perhaps unrelated, something completely different, not related to what I'm building out at all, but they've mentioned how busy things are or how many different learning initiatives are coming at them right now and how stressed they are and how overworked and all this kind of stuff. So I've gone, there's no point in me trying to launch this next month. No point. I'm shifting my timelines. And I think it's just, little things like that where it might not have been that exact purpose you're in that conversation, but you've heard something that makes you think, I need to adjust my approach.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I agree with a couple of points there. Recency bias, like one signal that you just heard isn't confirmation of
Yes.
a particular worldview or a problem, and also timing is everything. I wanted to ask you another question. It's around this idea of building in practical application as a way to get buy-in, or clear calls to action in order to create more buy-in. Tell us a little bit about why and how that happens.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to it makes it real, it makes it relevant to, the person and what they're doing. And I think what you want to avoid is the whole, oh, that was great. I mean, it was quite an interesting half an hour or an hour session, but I mean, I'm not going to do anything with it. Like nothing's going to change about the way I operate or the way I behave. Like, we're in the game of behavior change, right? And making sure people are putting things into practice and, ensuring a better outcome for them personally, but also for the business. And it comes back to that whole, everybody's why is different. So I think it's super key to think about some of those things. And I think it also helps with the tangible output as well. Like if you've got a practical application for the learning that you're putting forward, and there is some tool that they can use that puts their learning to practice, or some way that they can embed it within what they're doing in their day to day, you have then got some really quick tangible outputs to your learning content. You can say for sure that was valuable and that resulted in behavior change. And I think again that's good from a learning and development point of view, and for you and your career, but also for the business, but also for the individual, right, as well. I think if you can say to them, hey, by engaging in this learning program, you will improve X, Y, Z, and you'll be able to sit there in your one-to-one or your mid-year review, end of year review, whatever it is, and say, I have improved very clearly improved on these 3 points as a result of engaging in this learning program. And you have supported them in advancing their career, and they can immediately see that value and link it to that. I think that is super powerful.
Yeah, no, I can see the thread of what you said there, because if you know what motivates people and the problem they have, you can create something that practically solves that problem. And if it practically solves that problem, you get buy-in because people have seen the value and they're willing to go back to the start of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Conscious of time, but any sort of final thoughts on, you mentioned stakeholders earlier, about working with stakeholders in the right way to get buy-in?
Yeah, so I think the stakeholdering bit, again, this has kind of been born mainly out of my change management experience, but I have a very kind of targeted group of different stakeholders I need to go to. So I think that's something that I'd give advice, I'd advise anybody to think about, what's the input I need. And if you don't know who those people are, that's fine. Like, again, I work in a massive company. I can't possibly know all the different people that should be involved in what I'm developing. But what I can say is I need somebody who has influence, somebody who's a decision maker, somebody who could be a sponsor, somebody who can help you write content. And then this is broadly what they need to give me. Be clear on your asks, and then use your network. Go and say to people, hey, I don't know who this person is, but this is what I need. And they'll be able to help you connect the dots. And the other thing I'd say from my personal learnings is, actively engage the naysayers and the people that are causing issues and being loud. Like that, they are the best people to get on board with any sort of initiative you're doing. They are actually passionate and engaged, right? Whether that, they might be kind of, negative about it and say, putting challenges and obstacles in your way, but at least they're passionate and engaged about what you're doing. Your worst enemy is the people that don't say anything and don't give a shit either way. So excuse my French, but those are the people that you want to really, really kind of target, and actually their pessimism and their view on things and their addressing all the challenges is really useful to you in building something out. So that's something else I'd say is go and seek out those people, do it earlier because it will take them longer to get on board. But once you have and you've involved them in the process, your life will be so much easier.
Yeah. No, perfect. I think those people are useful to tackle first because they add noise. And if it
Yes.
feels like there's a lot of noise that L&D is bad in the business or whatever, you're competing against that. So I completely agree. Speaking of calls to action, I'm going to put one in the chat now if you want to connect with Hannah on LinkedIn, learn any more stuff from her, or connect and send a message to say thanks or ask follow-up questions. I'm sure Hannah will be happy to do that. So Hannah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
From one Hannah to another, which is a nice, easy segue. Hannah Clark, can you give us kind of that 1 minute elevator pitch of who you are and what it is that you do?
Oh, 1 minute. I don't think I'll be able to take a minute. I'm Hannah Clark. I spotted a few names in the chat. You might know me as Hannah Wadhams. I got married earlier this year, so I went rogue and changed my name everywhere just to confuse people. I am a marketing for learning strategist and the marketing director at MAAS Marketing. And at MAAS Marketing, we are the only marketing agency that is dedicated to the world of L&D. I work with people like you guys every day to help my clients get that learner engagement, get those people bought in, and use marketing practice and expertise to really transform L&D functions. We've been going for 5 years this year. Exponential growth. It's been phenomenal. And that's really me in a nutshell. I help people like you guys get that engagement. We've got some wonderful evidence of that as well, but I won't go on about that.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty vain when it's just me talking.
Got lots of anniversary. I forgot to say, congrats to Hannah on her 1 year at Denstu and then 5 years of MAAS marketing. So it's a big celebration. Cool. Let's get into it, Hannah. So starting with the perception of L&D and why it matters. Why is that a good starting point, and what's your advice for tackling that?
Well, it's quite nice. It follows on quite nicely from what Hannah was just saying about stakeholders and getting people bought in. In L&D, we seem to have this problem with ourselves, don't we? We seem to know that we're perceived in a certain way. We're either order takers, we're a compliance powerhouse, we're a tick box exercise. We know we're more than that, but we know that that's how other people see us. And what I've realised, and I've been in L&D now for well over 10 years, is that we kind of just accept that. Oh yeah, stakeholders in the business, they think we're a tick box exercise. They just want us to be e-learning monkeys, go away, create the course, come back, done. And we need to start shifting that mindset. We need to be the ones to say, actually, our L&D strategy is linked to the business strategy in X, Y, and Z ways. We need to be the ones that when somebody comes to us and says, can you just create this, whatever it is, we push back and say, why? And I think I spend a lot of time talking to L&Ders about adopting a marketing mindset. And sorry, Gary, because you're the other marketer on this call, we are some of the most annoying people in the world. We say why, we question things, we push back, we are comfortable with being the awkward person in the room. And that helps us get further along the process. Imagine if L&D started doing that and they started being like, well, but why do we need an e-learning course? Is this not better as a PDF? Is this not maybe a one-pager instead? And I think the perception of L&D will change when we start challenging the perception of us. And that will help not only us get us buy-in from upwards with like our stakeholders, our leaders, the CEO, senior leadership team, that kind of thing, but also with the audience. Like, I'm not sure if anybody else would have seen it, but there's been a bit of a craze on TikTok of people taking the mick out of corporate learning. We are a joke at the moment on TikTok because people are like, oh, I'm going to click next really fast. It's always the Toy Story gif that they use there. But they do laugh at us because they don't take us seriously. So we need to start pushing back on that and saying, actually, look at how we can help. Look at how we impact the bottom line. It's not about hours learning. It's about performance change. And I think we need to start making that change in our narrative and what we report on and what we talk about if we want the business to start taking us a bit more seriously.
Absolutely. I can confirm I'm always the most annoying person
I knew you would be.
on any call, asking why. I remember just pushing back against like director level people in my old company because they wanted to use terms that our customers would never use. And I would just have an argument once a week, I think. So I would always recommend that, stand your ground. Another part of this perception conversation that I think often gets overlooked is how we perceive our stakeholders, in quotes. Viewing them as learners itself, we've spoken about this before, is quite a challenging or quite a problematic issue. So tell people a little bit about why that is an issue.
Yeah, I passionately hate the term learner. It still falls into my vernacular every now and again because we work in L&D and that's the term we all use. But learner comes with almost power behind it, saying that they're already learning, that they want to learn, that learning is their priority, that they're even thinking about it. And I think if we all took a minute, and I've seen some of the comments in the chat, and I know you guys feel the same, how people don't actually care about learning. So when we're looking at our audience group, and typically it's employees in an organization, but if you're selling learning externally, your audience, your customers, they're not thinking about learning. That's not the first item on their to-do list. Nobody ever jumped out of bed in the morning and was like, I want to learn about GDPR today. It doesn't happen. So when we change the narrative and we start thinking of them as our audience or our consumers or customers, it changes how we talk to them. It changes how we initiate that conversation and try to engage them. Like Hannah made a really lovely comment of like everyone has a different why. We start answering that why because we're not assuming that they're just going to pick up what we're doing because we told them to. It really just changes your thought process about how you engage with people. And then that trickles on into actually creating, firstly, better communications and marketing, but secondly, actually better learning content, I've noticed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is part of the issue, isn't it? It's you take it on a surface level what the problem is. There's a great online PT called James Smith who creates a lot of great content, and his thing is people come to him and tell him they want to lose weight, but that's not the why. There will be this moment that kind of maybe their clothes didn't fit them as well as it used to, or they got out of breath walking up the stairs. It'll be like a deeper why that you have to push back to. And I agree, once you get to that, that's when you build this personal connection,
Yeah.
which I think.
And just to quickly add to that, I saw a comment that was like, well, actually, some of the stuff we put out there is generic. It's have to do. People don't want to do it.
Yeah.
We have to challenge ourselves to spend a bit more time thinking about the answer to that and linking that personal why with the business why. I promise you, I've never come up against something I haven't been able to link in some way or another.
Yeah.
It's just about thinking about that hook. And it does take time. There's no quick win there, but we need to spend a bit more time thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a good conversation with someone recently who was explaining like if you can link how the employee experience relates to the customer experience, then you can create a better sense of connection that might not seem obvious on the surface. So it's about maybe there'll be more steps to it, but there's definitely a connection between this thing that might seem like you want to Toy Story it into next week and wear out your mouse by clicking on it. But there is a connection. You just have to dig a little deeper to find it.
Yeah.
Digging into that a little bit more, now that we view people as people and not learners, are there any tips on working out what it is they really care about and then creating something that really gets them involved?
Yeah, Hannah touched on this as well. You've just got to talk to people. And I know that really simplifies the matter. I know many of us are working in huge, huge organizations. One of my big clients at the moment has over 340,000 employees. How on earth am I meant to talk to those people and really understand what they want and they need? And I've realized that even just talking to a really small percentage, I think with that client, I managed to speak to just over 100 people. I got so much from them. I understood so much about them. There are commonalities with people within a workforce. You will quickly notice the red threads that tie your people together. And there's typically 3 or 4 different buckets that somebody falls into. Going out and speaking to them will transform how you think about your audience, but also their perception of you. So it works both ways. You have a really great discovery call. They feel heard. They feel listened to. It creates an overall impact. But it really is about, I always struggle to say this to an L&D group, to stop thinking so much about learning. When you're talking to people, what gets them out of bed in the morning? I've already said nobody jumps out of bed and says, yay, GDPR training. But what is it that makes them come to work every day? What is it that's distracting them? Especially in the world we live in now, post-COVID, we're all kind of working more hybrid. Some people are back to the office a few days a week. What does that mean to them as an individual? How's that impacting them? What about if you work in an organization where change is like rife? It's happening every other day and nobody can keep up. What impact does that have to them as an individual? How's that making them feel? And it's really a task of empathy. We're really trying to put ourselves in their shoes and think about how are they feeling and how is that impacting them? Once we understand them to that extent, then we can start thinking about, okay, well, if they're feeling really fed up at work because there's so much change, maybe they don't want an email every week telling them to go and do a new e-learning course. Like that's probably not going to help with their mental state, is it? So what do? Can we go to where they're already hanging out? Can we, I don't know, maybe you've got an intranet that people spend a lot of time on, or like Workplace for Business. Can we capture them there rather than using the really formal email? Can we go through their managers? Can we cascade information down? We start thinking about different ways to not bombard them, but actually truly grab their attention. And that, in my experience, is the biggest part we're missing in L&D. We're not grabbing attention. So we assume everyone's aware of what we've got, and they're not. They're just not aware of the learning offering. They might know the learning platform's there. They might know there's an L&D team, but they don't know what that means for them. And that's what we need to start doing.
Yeah. 100%. I always say it a bit too passive aggressively, maybe, but I always say to people, read the room. And I think that is what what you need to be a bit more attuned to is actually like, I read a good stat. It's like, I think 4 in 10 people say that their willingness to learn and develop is linked to what's happening outside their work life. What's happening in their personal life has a strong correlation on how willing they are to learn and how much time and mental capacity they have to dedicate to it. So yeah, I'm going to stop saying it less passive aggressively, but I will keep telling people to read the room.
No, do it.
Last port of call, obviously, hopefully people already know about mass marketing and what you're doing around marketing for learning, but how important is it that we don't try and fix bad learning experiences with good marketing, in quotes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think often when I do sessions like this or talk to people for the first time, so if anybody hasn't heard me talk before, they're probably thinking, Hannah, you can't fix all my problems with marketing. I've never said I can. Absolutely not. I can create you the world's best marketing campaign. If your learning is rubbish, your people aren't going to come back. We need to think about our audience. And like I said, I think it was in the first question, that once we get to know them better, we can actually create better learning experiences as well. All of that carries through to everything. But if you've got a rubbish learning experience and they've landed, they're not coming back. You've got to do 10 times the work to try to re-engage them to come back to your learning. So marketing is a really big component. And I think it's probably the biggest gap in L&D's kind of skill set. The LPI, it's one of their top 5 skills that L&Ders need to develop. So it's being recognized by the industry. But that doesn't mean all the other skills aren't important. And I think if we kind of accept that, hey, like marketing's very important, but so is everything else. And we can use some of that marketing thinking to make everything else a bit better as well. We're going to end up in this like, kind of euphoric place that, learning really makes an impact to the business. And that's where I want to see the industry going.
100%. That's such a good point, because I think often people are thinking, how do I use marketing to promote what I've already got, as opposed to doing what you and Hannah both spoke about, which is work out how I solve a problem and then market that effectively. Because like you say, the point isn't to gaslight people wanting to come in to look at something and damaging our perception even further. It's for people to, but for us to set an expectation with the marketing for the content and learning we deliver, and then we're in, like you say, that really strong spot.
People think marketing is just making things look pretty and putting adverts out there. Advertising is, even going back years, just a quarter of what we do in marketing. And I think that whole breadth of marketing thinking is what's going to help L&D, not just the promotion bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've put 2 links in the chat. One is to connect with you on LinkedIn. One is to learn a bit more about mass marketing, because I know you've got great resources that people can go and check out, podcasts, guides, courses, the whole lot, if they do want to learn more about marketing for good learning experiences, not just I don't want to say polishing a turd, but it's the only thing that came to mind. Cool. Hannah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to do another shameless plug. If you want to know a bit more about building good content, good pathways, good learning experiences, I think in a couple of weeks, I'm being joined by 3 of our content partners who are going to give us some tactical advice on how they create content, but then also walk us through some real life examples. So it's the first time we've done this. Hopefully there's no tech issues and it all works well. But if you want to learn more, I've just popped a link to that in the chat as well. And we're going to move on to the 2 Sams, and we're doing perfectly for time, but please do keep dropping questions and thoughts in the chat. We probably won't get to them now, but I'll definitely consolidate them all and see if we can answer them all on LinkedIn or newsletter or something like that. Sam Streak, over to you. Tell us that quick intro to who you are and what it is that you do.
Cool. So I'm Sam. I'm the co-founder of the People Experience Group, and we're a consultancy that focuses on, unsurprisingly, employee experiences. So that ranges from management and leadership development through to reviewing and supporting businesses with their entire employer journey. And again, for me, that is we have a real focus on bringing those experiences and a focus on people as consumers, which is how we sort of think employees act and behave now. So how do we take a UX approach to the people journey, and that's how we support businesses.
Cool. It's really good that you introduced the people experience group there off the back of what Hannah said and not the learner experience group. So it wasn't an awkward transition there. Sam, something we've discussed before is being problem-led over solution-led. And I think what's often missed is the influence that has on the conversations you have. If you're problem-led, it frames the way you have conversations, which increases your chances of getting buy-in, in my opinion. So tell us about this problem-led approach and the benefits that has.
Yeah, so I think we're all probably guilty of seeing a solution and thinking, that'd be great. You know, I had someone come to me in a business recently. It said, I've seen this piece of software, and it basically puts together CRM training live. So you on your CRM, and it tells you how to use it. How great is that? Sounds pretty cool. Good solution. Is there a problem with people using the CRM in the business? No. So, great solution to have, great learning tool, but actually not going to have any impact. So how are you going to sell that to a finance director that doesn't want to give you any money anyway, right? So for me, it really is making sure that we, focus on what is the problems that the business is facing. What is the business strategy? What are they trying to achieve, and what's stopping them getting there? And then how can L&D have an impact on that? So a good example of a business that I've worked in is huge amount of turnover. So they want to grow as a business, high amount of employee turnover. And that's the problem. But when you dig down, what is the deeper problem? They weren't setting people up for success, right? They were hiring, no real great onboarding. Some guy sort of just delivering what used to be face-to-face, now online, and it's exactly the same content. And due to COVID, it's just, a bit gross, right? So the solution, then, what is the solution to that problem, and what then linking that to what would be the commercial impact? So changing from what they don't deem as a problem at the moment, they don't think that's the reason for turnover, but it is that if you connect the problem to the solution, which is improving the onboarding and training, and this is how we're going to do it, and it's going to cost X amount, what is the return on investment that you're planning on seeing to gain the buy-in to that initiative? And for me, that's always really important when you start having conversations going upwards. Is it will be about the return on investment, the commercial impact. And if you go with just a solution without it being a problem or highlighting the problem, then you won't get the buy-in, and people won't look to change.
Yeah, I suppose that speaks to some of what we said already, understanding your stakeholder, someone maybe you're managing upwards to, maybe their primary concern is how much are we spending on this versus the impact it has. But I really like that point around nailing which part of the process is causing the lack of buy-in, maybe, or the root cause of the problem would be the bad onboarding experience translates to later down the line people leave. So I really like that. I want to dig into framing a little bit more, which is, to this idea of actually how do we understand each stakeholder well enough to communicate with them effectively. So tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I think a few people touched on it already, but not many senior leaders wake up and go, my people need to learn more, right? So when you're in L&D, and this is always, it used to be a frustration of mine that I would, see a gap, know that I've got a great solution, it's solving a problem, then I go and say, look, we need, some money, or I think we need to do this, or whatever it may be. And then you meet somebody and they're like, no, it's not important. And what I really learned over the years is, I don't like to use the word manipulation, but emotional intelligence and influence is probably a better term, but understanding what's important to that person. And a lot of senior leaders do have long lists of issues that they're trying to tackle. So if you can meet them somewhere where they are, rather than waiting for them to come to you and meet you with your, I suppose, ideas and ideals, actually you've got to meet them. So if it is a finance director, it normally is going to be a commercial conversation. They want all the detail. They want, what's the return on investment going to be? Whereas if you're talking to somebody like, normally people in marketing, sorry for the marketers on the call, but they don't want the detail. They want the vision. They want, what's it going to look like? How are people going to feel? So as someone who's trying to influence and gain buy-in to L&D, it's really important that you understand who you're trying to influence and, where they are and what's important to them, and making sure that you are adapting and wearing different hats is really important. I used to be stuck in an ideal world of, this is a really good L&D that we're, producing initiatives and programs and pathways. Nobody's using it, but it's because we weren't meeting people and meeting them where they're at and solving the problems they have. So that's, again, what I found really useful is understanding who you're trying to influence, understand what's important to them, and meet them there.
We often talk about telling a good story around that. And actually, the context you mentioned there is an important part that often gets overlooked. Someone's level of investment will determine how much context they need, or how much time they have to dedicate to something, or how much mental capacity they have. There's often this idea that if you're presenting something, you maybe need 2 decks, right? In the first 5 minutes, you need to cover off the real crux of the matter. So someone like a CEO who might have to drop off, or, needs convincing this is worth their time, sees the value in it. And then someone might need more context. Other people might need a different hook, a different spin on why they should care about something. So I really think that is, a really salient point around understanding not just, why someone's invested, but the extent to which they are, how they're invested, the influence solving the problem would have on them, because that all feeds into telling the right compelling story to people. So we talked, I think we kind of lent into this a little bit, but baggage sometimes is a problem, like how you're perceived. But I know one thing you have great insights on is there might be baggage that's caused by the tech you've used in the past. And that can take some turning around itself, especially if you still have the same tech in place, or you're shifting to a new tech and maybe people perceive that we're going to have the same problems with a new tool. So how can we kind of tackle that issue of the baggage from tech?
Yeah, I think there's tons of solutions out there, right? And I'm sure most people use different systems in their businesses on the call. Not all of them are great, and not all of them keep up to date with the needs and the changing approach of how people learn the content, how they want to consume it. And I work in and go into businesses, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got a learning management system, we've got our HR system." And the experience that people have with them is really poor. There's not much uplift. There are not many people doing any learning digitally on the system, and that then creates real difficulty in gaining buy-in to adopting new systems, or even making the most out of the systems that people have. So I think that, for me, the really important thing there then is trying to create almost the again, going back to what's the problem and how do we fix it? So if the LMS is functional, but, doesn't integrate with your HR system and people have to sign in and out, what's the problem of why people aren't using the systems, and really finding the root cause of that first and foremost. That's the root cause. You can put all the learning on there, but if it's really hard to get into, people don't remember their passwords and everything else, then nobody will use it. So again, if you take a consumer approach to overcoming problems, it's how easy can we make it? Can it be, how do we want them to feel when they're using it? So you want them to almost feel as if they're using everyday tech, which is really important. And if your current tech systems aren't providing that, then you're never really going to get the lift or the buy-in to it from the users, from senior leadership, and it'll just sit there getting dusty. So there is always challenges with, perception around L&D or any parts of, the people function, that the systems aren't great, they're clunky, but actually, I don't want to plug HowNow too much, but there are systems, like HowNow that give a great learning experience, and they make it really accessible, and then people, it becomes part of people's everyday. So one business I worked in, for example, they did their onboarding through the HR system that integrates into HowNow. So then they start their induction and their learning automatically, everything's sent out. The HR team, the L&D team love all that process because there's no, contracts to be sent out or joining instructions. All of that's automated. It's in a really good seamless experience for the user. And then because they're in there straight away, they're in there again because it's accessible from lots of different places. Things are pushed out to them at the right times. And I think that's again really important when you're gaining buy-in, is not just we've got this great system that's better than our old system, but this is how we're going to get people using it. This is why it's almost consumer grade and why people are going to love it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to echo your point there, some of the feedback we often get is around how well we centralize everything into one place to remove friction so people can find it, and how well that integrates with the places you already work. So I'm going to have to hit my third shameless plug of the day, but I'm going to put a link to learn more about HowNow in the chat if you'd like to learn a bit more about what Sam explained there. But it's interesting you mentioned people's expectations around tech they use outside of work. I hadn't thought about this until now, but it's not just tech baggage from what you control, it's tech baggage from the things people use day to day. So I'll give you a real example. I inherited a washing machine when I moved into this place that it took 6 hours to wash my clothes the other day. So I'm looking at like all the YouTube videos that are telling me actually how to do this in at least half the time. If it only takes me 2-3 minutes to do that outside of work, why do I need 45-minute training video or something like this inside of work? So I would really encourage people to consider, what tech are people using outside of work actually, because that is going to really influence level of buy-in too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. A lot of discussion I have with businesses is around meeting people where their consumers are. So understanding the people in your business and where they're learning. I'm getting a bit older now, but I see a lot of people learning via TikTok and YouTube, and it's where they are. Lots of people don't even watch television anymore, which makes me feel really old. But can we meet the audience where they are and provide solutions there? So do you have a company YouTube channel where someone can just go and watch a video on a how-to really quickly? So again, if you're in a smaller business that maybe can't afford or doesn't have a big enough problem where the solution is an LMS, there are cheaper solutions such as social media and things that can provide the solution for you.
No, exactly. I mean, it's a nice thread throughout this actually about meeting people where they are, trying to understand them and remove friction for them is really the key to all of this. No one, if I go to a restaurant and I wait an hour for the food, I'm not going to go back, am I? But if it's quick and it's a good experience, then I guess that's the trade-off. Sam, thank you so much. I'm going to drop 2 links in the chat, one to connect with you on LinkedIn, one to learn a bit more about the people experience group and what you do there. And I would definitely recommend following Sam on LinkedIn. He's creating some great content and lots of insightful, practical stuff. So those links are in the chat now. And we are good for time. So Sam, just one final thank you before we move on to our second Sam in the order. Sam Goodman, thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sort of completely different. Still feel like I'm out of my comfort zone a little bit, but yeah, I'm Sam Goodman. I work for ITPenergised, which is part of SLR. We are an environmental consultancy company. Been in L&D for sort of in a private sector, shall we say, for about 21 months now. I was a teacher, that's my background, for over a decade. Outdoor education, primary, secondary, 5 years old to 18 years old. I've sort of taught various ages and different backgrounds. And then stepped into the world of L&D as I moved from England to Scotland and thought, okay, let's try something different, try something new. But my sort of big love has always been actually regarding staff development and sort of the continual growth mindset that obviously not everyone has, but I do like to encourage, shall we say. So it's been transferable skills.
Yeah. Well, thanks for first and foremost for putting yourself out your comfort zone and coming to share your advice. And you know what, I spoke to someone who became a teacher recently, and he was telling me the struggles of getting buy-in from students. So I'm sure if you can do that, you're gonna nail this one now. It's quite a well-trodden path. I've heard from a lot of people who've moved from some sort of higher education role into teaching, but I've never got to dig into this a bit more. So, what are you using from your teaching experience to drive the buy-in you get now in your L&D role?
It's really interesting because actually going from sort of teenagers who don't really want to be at school at the end of the day to then going into a company where adults don't really want to learn, it's actually quite been eye-opening. But then I realized that there's so many techniques that what I did in schools are transferable into adult learning. And I found that some don't use it. And when I walked into this company, and they said, here's our learning resources. And I opened the Teams file on SharePoint and all that jazz. And all I saw was PowerPoints and the recording of the PowerPoint. And I was like, that's not learning. That's not a learning resource. That's death by PowerPoint. You've recorded it and you've pointed someone in the direction of a recording. We've got a huge neurodiverse cohort of colleagues here. We're not meeting their needs. This is just completely bonkers. And I really then had to sort of go, actually, well, hold on, how can I get people? It wasn't a case of actually people not showing up for learning. They did, but I think that's the culture of the company, that they always put on lunch and learns and seminars, and people came. But it was the delivery and the accessibility of what they were learning just wasn't there. And so the retention wasn't there. And loads of people were going, oh, we've delivered this. What do you mean they don't remember scoping and they don't remember supplier management? Okay, well, actually, is it their fault, or is it the learning from the beginning and the build out that was the problem? And that's what it was. PowerPoint is not a learning resource. It's a slide deck to support a presentation that's the presenter as the main focal point. It was all wrong. So I threw in some techniques, and I don't want to go into them too much by you. And if anyone wants to have a conversation about them in more detail, and you've probably heard them before, but things like flip learning, giving content before a training session, great for buy-in because it gets them involved right from the start in their own comfort zone. They take ownership. You've got them before they've even started any form of training. I did a lot of anonymous input, so anonymous post-it notes on a whiteboard. Got people who'd never wanted to contribute before actually involved because they didn't want their name attached to things. You have that sort of, I really want to say something, but I don't want to be out loud in school. It's the same for adults. Adults don't like to have their names attached to their opinions and their thoughts. Okay, well, let's use a tool that takes that out. And it's amazing how the engagement started to come from that. Things like peer-to-peer learning and getting people in breakout rooms. They're the experts. Go and talk amongst your colleagues. There's all these simple techniques that I think sometimes get missed. And what I needed to instill was actually something that it's always stayed with me. A psychologist called Jamil Qureshi, who says, to act differently, we need to think differently. And I just needed to get some key people just to start thinking differently and actually sort of really embed that to make a difference.
That example you gave of the PowerPoint recording is the perfect example of what we just discussed, expectations out of work and in work. I watch a YouTube video, typically it's got chapters or timestamps at the very least, so I can navigate through, or it's got a transcript. But you so often see, like you said, it's just here's the recording, you go and find the thing, and then, like you say, it's kind of my back is covered because I've given you the access to this thing rather than clearly signposting it. So yeah, you're preaching to the converted in this case. I know that kind of what you just shared around teaching kind of influences your view on top-down investment too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on getting that.
Yeah, I think it's sort of been mentioned, I think, with the Hannahs, that getting the key stakeholders, it's key. And it really is. It's got to come from the top down. And I liken it to my time in school where they tried to change behavior policies. And if the head teacher wasn't buying into it, why the hell would anyone else? And the response you'd get is, well, they didn't do it. So it's the same in L&D. If you've not got the top person or service leads or line managers role modeling what you're trying to encourage and promote, why is anyone going to do it? So you've got to really engage in those conversations. And I think one of the things I've put down in sort of going, it's actually, I think when we're summing up these difficult conversations, two things come to mind. One, we've got to practice what we preach. If we're delivering training or sharing resources on having difficult conversations, we've got to have them. We've got to be the people who have those difficult conversations. We've got to use assertive communication of going, you're a line manager, your responsibility is this. You're a service lead, your responsibility is this in this context, and actually holding people account, because without them buying into what you're trying to do, it's going to fail. And we get really frustrated by it. Yes, we can take out the things of going, everybody wants to learn and they're detractors and we're never going to catch them. But we can if the right people are involved. And I think it's really, really important that we sort of get those role models right in from the top down. Otherwise, it's just the whole system fails.
Yeah. I like what you said about responsibility there, because one of my favorite things is to work backwards. So often there's an issue with clarity around who's responsible for what, especially in the development conversation. But if we know who's responsible and where the clarity is, we can then really look at the problems that stop someone getting to that thing. And it links nicely to something I read recently around how many managers are struggling as well. You know, if a manager feels too busy to focus on their own development, then that's a problem. And there's likelihood that the same problem mirrors in the people they're trying to lead. So I do think that clarity around responsibility and then what are the problems that stop us delivering that outcome, and being empathetic at the same time as, you know, holding people to account is that's an issue, because I don't have the stats to hand. If anyone's interested in them, I can dig them out and share them later. But yeah, the percentage of managers who said they were struggling and they needed more enablement is pretty stark. One thing we wanted to discuss, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but it'd be great to get your thoughts on how you're building personal connection and the role of that and the importance of that, especially if there's any kind of lessons you've learned from teaching on that.
It's been spoken. I don't want to dwell on this too much because I know that everyone's talks about just being more human at the end of the day, just having conversations and getting to know people. I'm very fortunate that in our sector of sort of the company, we only have just over 100 people. And I've tried my best to get in touch and have conversations with everybody, but it's just in things like informal conversations. So at the end of maybe something that is booked and it's planned, to actually just be human and get to know people. Because from that, I've learned if they've got any neurodiverse diverse behaviors and they've got some needs, because I can then at least adapt my training for them. I build relationships, increases improvement in communication. It's just being more human, but it's taking sort of the formalities away of it and actually just getting to know someone for the sake of getting to know someone, because it ultimately helps you. But also what I was saying, I wrote something down here actually with what I think we're talking about, getting those key stakeholders, and someone said about how do we challenge the why? By having conversations and getting to know people, there you get your answer of why. Because you can back it up. You've got your data point. Oh, I've had a conversation with so-and-so and so-and-so, and they said this. And actually, when I spoke to the other team, they also said this. There's the evidence. But I think I'm in a very fortunate position that I can do that in the size of our company. When you've got hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, it's quite hard to do, but it's important to go and have those. and then taking that feedback and what works, what doesn't work, build on the positives, grow and develop with any constructive, but you can't do that without actually communicating to people.
Yeah.
And just use those words, just be more human.
Yeah. You know, the cliche people buy from people often gets derided because it's a cliche, but actually this is really translating now into a lot of things I'm seeing in marketing, and I'd imagine would translate to L&D as well. And it's this concept that creator-led pages or individual-led pages and content are getting far more engagement, far more consumption than stuff that comes from brand pages. And, you know, if you translate that down to a human level, if something faceless comes out from your marketing team or your L&D team, are you really going to buy in? If I have a personal connection to you and I see you as a human and the message comes from you as an individual, then that concept of the creator-led stuff or the individual-led stuff being consumed at a higher rate is far more likely to succeed. So I'd love to know in the chat if anyone's had, you know, success with that, building their internal brand as a person, not just a department, I guess is what I'm getting at. Sam, one final question for you. You kind of alluded to this already, but this idea of taking control as a means to improve buy-in, is that kind of showing ownership, showing initiative, or is it something more than that?
Both. It was one of those things no one was in my role when I joined, so I've had to build it up. So actually whatever I've delivered and changed positively has been sort of well received. But I think what I didn't do, and I'm a one-man band as well, which makes it a little bit more challenging. I don't have other people to rely on. So there's a lot of people who resent my communication because for some reason my name is stamped to everything. But I've kind of sort of taken that as one of those things. But having those conversations we got 3 main key service leads, and having them buy in and making the lines of communication transparent has been quite key. But one thing that I held my hands up and said I didn't do sort of early on, which I should have done, but I was still learning, which was taking control completely of training. And it came about, and what I mean by that is it came about 4 months ago where someone delivered training. I wasn't aware of it. I was made aware 24 hours before. And I said, can I speak to you about your training? I want to make sure that it's meeting the needs of your team, because there was different languages people spoke. So English as a additional language was rife within what they were going to deliver. Definitely there were some autistic people within that as well. So their learning needs were different. And he went, yeah, no problem. That's fine. Yeah, we can talk about it. I'm delivering it tomorrow at 2:00. So I'll send you the invite. And I went, well, I can't do anything about that now. I'm not going to change your training just before. So after that point, I was like, that is it. So I literally sent an email out to everybody who is the key stakeholders and said, every bit of training, the moment that you go, I want to deliver something, you have to get in touch with me. And that's not me taking it out of their control. It's an internal consultancy of going, right, what is it you want? We're going to build this out together. Created a flow chart and basically said, right, we're at this point and we go through it together. And it's a case of, what can I do to help you? You give me the content, I can help format it. If you want to learn how to format it, we'll do that together and we'll build this out together. Not only does it empower them, it keeps them involved, it upskills them as well in actually what's good delivery and what they've been doing wrong in the past. It's moving away from the past of PowerPoint, recording, handing it over. And since then, we've delivered 3 of sort of pieces of training through this sort of internal consultancy flowchart, and it's just completely changed the perception of what training looks like in the company. And I just took control. It was assertive communication. I had to have those difficult conversations. I had to give some really difficult feedback to the person who delivered that awful 2-hour death by PowerPoint training on some really technical stuff, and basically just say, this is why it didn't go right. And that wasn't my feedback. That was from people who actually attended the training. I said, I went out, spoke to those involved and said, this is what they said. And it was a real waking up sort of moment for them.
Yeah.
But take control. We are, the final point before I sort of sum it all up is, we are the experts in learning and development. If we needed something that they do, we would go and ask them for support and help. So why is it that they think they can deliver learning and training when they're not the experts? It baffles me. We are the experts, so we need to take control of that and really sort of lead on from it.
Yeah, well, Hannah will agree with this as well. You've just hit on the big marketing problem. Everyone thinks they're a marketer. The amount of unsolicited advice I've received. Just to round something up there, actually, before we end, but we spoke about perception and baggage earlier, and one thing you mentioned there actually relates to both. How are you perceived when you come into the business, and can you set clarity around that? What baggage is there set by the expectations of what the last person used to do? And like you said, holding your hands up, I had the same problem where I didn't do this in my last business, and I would get so many requests for things that the last person used to do that I didn't have the skills for. Even down to the point where when I said I don't have the skills, they'd be like, "That's fine, you do it anyway." And then I get told it was bad, and I think, "Oh, this is not good for me." But yeah, I think, try and work out how the last person was perceived and what value they brought, and then try and set expectations about how you should be perceived, and move that forward. Cool. We are at exactly time. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Sam's, to Hannah's. That made my promotion of this event and the manager of it much easier. But thank you everyone for joining us. There's so many great comments and questions in the chat that I'll try and consolidate and either round up or get some answers to afterwards. So yes, thank you. And hopefully we'll see you again at a future session.